Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at two important stories. The first is with what is going on in Ukraine and, of course, the conflict that has been evolving since a while now, and in the aftermath of which we have seen, of course, the kind of food security situation, economic crisis that has resulted in various parts of the world. We've also seen as a result that there has been what Joe Biden has referred to as the NATOization of Europe, which he has announced in recent days as well. So prior to the summit that is happening and has started yesterday. We also know that Joe Biden has called on the U.S. forces to increase its presence in various parts of Europe, which includes the military deployments in various parts of Europe, as well as enhancing various aircraft and other equipment in certain countries. Of course, this is what has been referred to as the NATOization of Europe, and this is in response to what Joe Biden believes is the actions that have put forward and called for such reactions by Vladimir Putin after the, of course, invasion of Ukraine. So we're going to be taking a look at that in further detail and try to understand how the US's moves is going to impact the security dynamic, NATO in itself, and then, of course, the impact it's going to have on the Ukrainian crisis as well. Our second segment of the show is going to take a look at the situation in Afghanistan. We know that there has been a humanitarian crisis in the country since the US troop withdrawal last year, and Afghanistan continues to suffer under a lot of pressure from the international community as well. There has been limited aid that has reached the country, and we've seen in the past as well that there has been a lot of emphasis on the Taliban regime actually fulfilling certain demands before they can actually be recognized, which means that currently the Afghanis are facing a lot of issues with regards to the economic collapse of the country, something which the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of Pakistan has also called for, that there needs to be an easing of Western sanctions against Afghanistan under the Taliban government, saying that this is going to be resulting in the collapse of the country and the basic functioning, which is going to impact the countries in the region as well and the world over. And she said this in an interview with Germany's Welt newspaper that was published on Thursday, and called on the international community to take action in this regard. So we'll focus on that and try to understand what needs to be done in Afghanistan and how do we help in terms of the economic collapse of the country and, of course, the humanitarian crisis that continues to persist there. For this and more, as always, we've been joined in the studios by Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal, and I've been joined online for my first segment by Mr. Alexander Povdunov. He's an International Eurasian Movement senior analyst, and also been joined by Tom O'Connor, who's a senior journalist. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us today. I'll start with you, Tom. When we look at what is going on with regards to the Ukrainian crisis, of course, we've talked a lot about how the situation is going to evolve and whether or not we're going to see a resolution anytime soon. But what we do see now, of course, is what is happening as a result or a consequence of this conflict, particularly the U.S. moves of increasing or enhancing its deployment and its military presence in various parts of Europe. How do you see this particular move and the kind of impact it's going to have on the security dynamic in Europe?
Sure. Well, it certainly, I think, has the risk to escalate already soaring tensions between great powers in Europe. And I think that, like in the lead up to this conflict that I discussed in previous months and even years leading to this, is that as much as this crisis is about Ukraine, and we have to keep talking about Ukraine, of course, because this is where the suffering is happening. The conflict is also very much about this great power competition. It's about competition between the U.S. and Russia, especially the Western Russia, especially in this sphere. And so what we're seeing right now is reactions that have less and less to do with Ukraine itself and more to do with that greater security order in Europe. And that's why these additional troops that the U.S. is pledging has very little to do with the actual war in Ukraine and more to do with the broader questions of security in Europe. And that's something that Russia sought to address in lead up to the conflict, and of course, something that remains unaddressed right now.
Right, but Tom, let me ask you whether it will actually harden the positions between the two blocs. Do you think that it can lead to further escalation or perhaps even conflict?
Well, I think the risk is certainly there because the more troops on the ground, the more military elements put in place on the very sensitive front lines that have emerged in Europe certainly raise the risk of not only just an actual conflict erupting by design, but by miscalculation as well. So this is something I think that is very concerning. At the same time, I think that Russia has found itself in a much more precarious position.
Are we at the Cold War level now, or at this moment we are below that threshold?
I mean, it depends how you define that. I think in some ways that we're past that level because what we're experiencing right now, which I think is one of the gravest elements of what's happening, is a lack of communication between the U.S. and Russia.
Yeah.
President Biden said some time ago a virtual rupture in relations.
Yeah, Alexander, I would like to come towards you. Obviously, America, it says that they have fears that Baltic states as well as Poland, they have a threat, a constant threat from Russia, that Russia might invade them countries as well. So this is why they are doing it for, number one. Can you confirm that the Russians, they have a plan like that in which they might go towards the Baltic states as well as Poland as well? Number one. And number two, I wanted to just ask you, you must have analyzed it, how much money we are looking at it when we talk about the arms industry of US. What would it be gaining out of it, number one? And number two, you know, how, yeah, number three, you know, how many forces they are sending there, and of course some of the countries would be paying for them forces to stay in Europe. Can you please tell me and analyze for me how much would it be?
Thank you for the invitation to this discussion. First of all, I should agree with my American counterpart that the increasing military presence of the United States on the eastern flank of NATO creates more pretexts for possible conflicts, and first of all, conflicts by mistake and miscalculation of both sides. What about the first question about the Baltic states? In Russian strategical thinking, they didn't have some serious meaning. So Baltic states, they are depopulated, they are weak, and there is no necessity to concentrate forces to overcome them or to occupy them. I don't know for what
about
would
Poland?
be the goal of this occupation, for example.
Alexander, what about Poland? Any idea
Poland,
whether Russian forces are planning to attack them as well?
How can you imagine that Russian forces, how they can invade Poland? So we have a common border at Kaliningrad exclave, and Kaliningrad is much more endangered by Poland, not Poland by Kaliningrad. And
about the cost, who will be bearing the cost of American troops getting into obviously Europe? Who will be paying the cost? Number one, and number two, about the arms. Who would be paying for the arms?
Of course, Europe will pay for the arms, and Eastern European countries, first of all, Romania, Poland. I don't know where, for example, Lithuania can find the money that will be necessary for these payments. Maybe the United States will pay for some arms from this from its budget. So by this they can.
All right, Tom. When we look at the current situation, and of course the U.S. moves with regards to increasing their presence, I want to also understand what that means for NATO alliance in itself. How are we seeing NATO over the years changing its course, or the kind of how it's identified, how it's understood, and the kind of impact it's going to have on its own allies as well as the countries around the world, especially Russia?
And do you think Article 5 is still relevant in this circumstance as well?
I mean, I think that Article 5 certainly is relevant. It's something that's been discussed openly, not just privately among the leaderships in the NATO countries. So it's something that I think that President Biden has sought to emphasize, especially when he says that he will not send U.S. troops to Ukraine itself. And I think right there we see the importance between what the difference is between an ally and a partner of NATO and the United States. Now, this is the part of the core of this conflict, is that Ukraine was a partner, not an ally, whereas the Baltic states are allies. So I think that certainly that draws a very red line when it comes to Russian military action there. Now, as far as the character of NATO, I think we are seeing NATO sort of relive its Cold War purpose, which was core purpose, which is countering Russian influence in Europe. At the same time, with the strategic concept that's come out, we've seen a new eye on China. But notably, China was described as a competitor, not a rival or a threat, in the same way that Russia was. So although NATO is certainly trying to adopt a harder line against China as well, this is a largely transatlantic alliance, and it's one that still has very close relations with China. So I think that the U.S. is trying to look more to the Pacific for our partners there, but it's a much more difficult aim than uniting Europe against Russia.
Right. I'm glad that you actually pointed to this nuance where on one side China is seen in a different light and Russia in a different one. But when it comes to partners or competitors, I mean, in space particularly, we have seen that Russia and the US have been partners. The current international, space station is actually created by the Russians, and you all cooperate in that as well. Don't you think that Russia being seen as an enemy or challenger is a big step forward or backwards?
Yeah, this is one of, I think, the sadder things that comes with the second order effects of geopolitical rivalries and conflicts when they erupt like this, because when we speak to experts or even officials involved specifically in space programs, it's very disappointing to see the breakdown in relations from both sides, the U.S. and Russia, the West and Russia, especially when it comes to space cooperation, because they were able to do so much together and stuff that they probably wouldn't have been able to do if they just remained in competition. Now, we are seeing a realignment here. We're seeing the U.S. and Western partners and other partners, of course, around the world getting more involved, bringing in more countries into their space cooperation. So there is certainly plenty of potential for cooperation and advancement there, even if Russia is not involved, although I think it will certainly set the program back. At the same time, for Russia, it's now looking at more projects with China, which, of course, is probably the fastest rising space power there. So it'll be interesting to see how these two sort of sides of the coin when it comes to space will be able to either cooperate or compete with each other, and what that'll produce.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll come to you, Alexander. When we talk about these consequences, of course, perhaps when there's a lot of focus on the conflict in itself and the military aspect of it, then perhaps such issues or such consequences don't really come in the forefront, and that has the consequence that there's a long-term damage to the relationship in itself as well. Moving forward, since we've seen that this conflict is perhaps nowhere near resolution just yet, how is this going to impact the way Russia and the US align themselves, their own dynamic, and then of course extending that to the NATO allies as well? Aren't we moving further apart, and perhaps the chances to actually have any sort of face saving is close to none?
I think that, first of all, the conflict creates the danger of direct military confrontation, and we should always think about it. The second will be the problem of long-term rivalry that will be, I think, for many years, and this will be recalibrate the whole world order. It will be more shattered, more divided. This will be, I think, the change to multipolar world order, but it will not go peacefully, with some conflicts, with trying to undermine influence of very party in this rivalry. With the new conflicts, for example, I think that in Central Asia and in other regions of the world, and the Americans they act unwisely because they instigate Russian-Chinese cooperation. For example, when they declare the China to be the obstacle, to be the not enemy but competitor in the strategical doctrine. They go beyond, first of all, go beyond the natural limits of NATO, which was designed for the North Atlantic nor for the Pacific region. And secondly, they create a more stronger enemy alliance of the Chinese People Republic and Russia.
Yeah. Tom, if we talk about, almost all of the countries, they want this conflict to ease up, and of course they want everything to get normalized in Europe, especially Ukraine. So can we say that this, sending more troops, sending more arms in Europe, it could be considered as a pressure tactic of US and NATO to pressurize Russia to stay or to contain itself in Donbass area, and obviously they have controlled and encircled Odessa as well as Mariupol as well. And if we look at their tactics and their the way they are shaping up their presence in there, it seems as if they will be very happy to contain that side of Ukraine rather than having the whole Ukraine, control of the whole Ukraine. Can we say that this pressure tactic is being used to pressurize Russia to stay there and move their forces from within Ukraine and go back to that position?
And Tom, while you're at it, please do tell us, when do you think the conflict is going to stop or end? Do you have any reading on that?
Sure. So I'll start with the first question. I think certainly, yes, there's an element of wanting to pressure Russia. I think that at the core of the U.S. and Western strategy is to convince President Putin that he made a mistake in attacking Ukraine, and that, and also I think there's an element of wanting to weaken Russia, which we've heard the Pentagon say out loud. I think that there's an element right now of wanting to portray Russia as a power that's sort of mired itself into a conflict it cannot win. At the same time, though, what we're seeing right now with the addition of these troops is it comes at a time when Russia has regained some momentum in certain parts of the conflict. Of course, we saw they faced some very early hurdles and had to reposition their strategy to focus more on the east and the south. Now that's where they are right now. Now these positions are ones that are very, very deeply entrenched, and the most difficult for Ukraine to sort of win back, unlike other parts of the north. So I think that what we're looking at, to seg into the second question, is a long-term conflict here, one that doesn't necessarily always have fighting on a daily, or at least on a larger scale on a daily basis, but a more frozen conflict, perhaps like we saw in 2014. But the question is, will the U.S. and Russia tolerate another sort of frozen conflict like this? Is there any appetite for diplomacy among the major powers, and of course Ukraine and Russia bilaterally, even towards a ceasefire?
Right. Mr. Alexander, I'll take the last question from you. If we're looking at a situation where there is, of course, a long-term conflict, and it's already much longer than perhaps we thought earlier, then how do we understand, when we look at the dynamics being unfolding and the consequences going on from food security to economic instability to challenges that particularly the developing world is facing, how do we expect the countries to actually deal with that, while simultaneously we're saying that there is, of course, a threat that keeps on increasing through the deployment of these forces as well?
I think that what concerns the internal dynamics of the conflict, it will last for months, if not years. But I'm not certain in what kind we will see these dynamics. They will be battles. They will be truces. It will be some kind of frozen. It may expand to other regions, for example, in Transnistria, Moldova breakaway region. So it's some kind unpredictable. How it will change internally in certain aspects. What about the other countries? First of all, the the so-called third world, I think that it creates, of course, problems, but at the same time, it creates a new prospects. For example, for India to buy more Russian oil, more cheap Russian oil, and use it in its
Right.
industry
Yeah.
or to resell it, etc.
Tom, very last question, very quick one. Just wanted to ask about arms industry of US. Of course, could it be considered as a fresh breather for them? Obviously, it would bring an excellent effect to American economy as well.
Well, I mean, certainly any conflict is good for the arms industry, but I think what we're seeing right now, even more potently, especially for everyday citizens here in the United States, is the economic effects of the rising energy prices right now, and that's something I think that is going to be a major threat to President Biden and the Democratic Party going into the midterm elections. So as much as Biden has been quite successful, I will say, in rallying both the United States and Western partners in support of Ukraine, at the same time, these economic realities are setting in more and more with the national average price of gas hovering around $5. This is something that President Biden is going to have to address, and he's finding ways to be able to do that. And that could mean some political compromise, either, if not with Russia, then perhaps with Iran or Venezuela. But there's certainly something that President Biden will have to do, and that, I think, will be a priority.
Speaking of quick questions, yes or no
very
question.
last.
Yes or no question, Tom. Do you think that this energy price spike is going to have an impact on the midterms, or do you think that because of what else is going on, Supreme Court's decisions, Roe v. Wade and everything, do you think that they are going to balance it out?
I think both will have an effect, and I think in the longer term, that at the end of the day, what the money in people's pockets is always going to be a top line issue. So that's something
All right.
that's certainly.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you,
and thank
Tom.
you very much,
Alexander.
Alexander, for joining us and being a part of the debate. We left you right at 7:30 when you had to leave. So there you go. Our second segment is going to be looking at the situation of Afghanistan, another area of conflict and crisis that has been going on for quite some time now, and especially since the withdrawal of the US troops, we've seen that the country has suffered a lot economically and otherwise as well, and there's a lot of economic crisis that is going on at the moment, and that of course calls on the international community to act in a manner which is beneficial for the country, something which the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Pakistan has also called for, and that of course is extremely important. But whether or not that's going to actually happen and how is it that the world is going to deal with it remains to be seen. For this, we've been joined online by Farrukh Pitafi, who's an Afghan journalist, and we've also been joined by Asif Jaladi, who's a former ambassador, and they'll be part of the debate, and we'll continue our discussion with them. When we look at the situation, Farrukh, in Afghanistan since the withdrawal of the US troop and the call of the international community to do something, especially what the Minister of Foreign Affairs is saying, is not really something new, and it's not something the world perhaps doesn't understand. But at the end of the day, it hasn't happened so far, and there are still the prerequisites that they've talked about before that still remain. Are we really going to be seeing any sort of change prior to the Taliban regime being recognized?
Right, Sana, this is a very important question. I think the state of affairs in Afghanistan really are heart-rending. The way people have been suffering is quite visible to everybody, and I think it is going to have quite an impact on everybody who is watching. The only problem is Afghanistan somehow, because perhaps of Ukraine, because of other things, has slipped off the global radar. And right now, nobody is paying that much attention. That's why perhaps the suffering keeps on increasing, and we have seen people who were barely keeping their heads above water gradually sinking below it, and that's why poverty is increasing. There's a little bit of good news that the US and Afghan Taliban are going to meet later in this week in Doha, and the only subject, the main subject, is the unlocking of their frozen assets.
Right.
We already know that half of that has been carved out and set aside, but whatever remains, at least that is there. So let us hope that at least there is a resolution, because if Afghan government has some kind of access to cash, then it can start delivering to the people as well. And of course, then we will demand more action regarding human rights, And eventually, when that happens, there will be a possibility of recognition as well. But until this, logjam actually doesn't break, things are going to go worse and worse.
All right. Faisal, if we do see the development of the frozen assets taking place, then do you think it's going to pave the way for other nations around the world to contribute towards the humanitarian aid as well? Because that seems to be a separate issue in itself. We talked about devising a framework to actually help the Afghan people get access to such humanitarian aid, but somehow that really hasn't happened, not even on the scale that it's needed. So there's of course the issue of the demands that the international community has, or the recognition of Taliban regime, or even the frozen assets. But the world can still help, no?
They can, of course, and they have helped, previously as well. If we talk about, countries like Germany, countries like UK, they have contributed in past as well for Afghanistan, though there were, Taliban who were their regime was still there when they started helping, because they could see that the humanitarian crisis, I would simply say that this humanitarian crisis, on top, of course, the earthquake situation in Afghanistan, it has created alarm bells throughout the world, especially to the neighboring countries. And of course, we being the immediate neighbor and Iran being the immediate neighbor of Afghanistan, China and Central Asian republics as well, they all are worried about it. It's a sort of a ticking bomb in Afghanistan right now. We know that since Taliban has taken over, the sort of, as we used to see the terrorism before, it has, gone down. Number of attacks, they have gone down in Afghanistan. The attacks we are seeing right now, they are from ISIS Khorasan, which is not only the problem for Afghanistan and the neighboring countries, it is a problem for the whole world, because ISIS Khorasan has always been termed as the breeding ground for ISIS, the Daesh. So I think it is a problem for every country of the world, and I am pretty much sure that when the things go normalize with the current regime, the interim regime, Taliban regime of Afghanistan, there will be more countries coming forward, especially the Middle Eastern countries, coming forward to help out Afghanistan. And I confirm you this, that today's Afghanistan, especially after the earthquake situation and before that, they were coping with the humanitarian crisis they have right now. It's a huge problem, and the world needs to look into it.
Absolutely. Let me also welcome in the debate Ms. Farrukh Jaladi, who's an Afghan journalist, and Mr. Asif Jaladi, who's a former ambassador. Thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Asif, I'll start with you. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, of course, has spoken about the easing of Western sanctions, but we all know that there's a long way till we actually achieve that, since there's so much that the Taliban regime hasn't done of what they had initially claimed that they will be able to achieve. Irrespective of that, the kind of crisis that we're seeing perhaps we should be able to see, because of that, that there is an ease and that there is a way to help the people and to ease their suffering. This is what the Foreign Minister had called for, but can we actually see this taking place, the easing of Western sanctions, irrespective of what the Taliban regime is doing right now?
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me say that the Minister Khar has not said something unusual, because there has been a collective demand by the immediate neighbors of Afghanistan in the past about unfreezing of the Afghan accounts, because that money belongs to the people of Afghanistan, and Americans, in fact, they have no right. And most importantly, the Americans left Afghanistan after having an agreement with the Taliban. So if that was the case, then they did not announce that they are going to be vengeful once they leave Afghanistan. But somehow now Afghans have to face the music. And it's not the Taliban, whether you like Taliban or not, but the issue is it's the people of Afghanistan who are suffering. And there's a need that the international community, which already is responding to the humanitarian crisis, there's a need that it's just not they have to feed, they also need education, health facilities and all that, which are available only bare minimum in Afghanistan. The result is that the unemployment rate is very high. Yeah. And the people cannot, in fact, earn a 2 square meal. And there is right now 95% of the country is below the poverty line. So in such a situation, I think Americans will have to realize, or those other Western powers who are dealing with Afghanistan or who are alive to the situation, that it is actually the humanitarian crisis which they need to address. Yes.
Tell you that you have such a beautiful name. Secondly, State Minister Khar of Pakistan, of course, she has, asked for sanctions to be lifted from, Afghanistan. Of course, Afghanistan is coping with the humanitarian crisis, number one, and number two, recent earthquake. It is a huge factor that is, adding to the existing humanitarian crisis. How do you see this statement coming from Pakistan, and how do you see how concerned Pakistan is for people of Afghanistan and for the betterment of Afghanistan?
Well, the question is for me, right? Because the sound
yes,
is very
it is, Farishta.
Unstable. Okay, thank you. Well, locally, I would like to say that most Afghans view Taliban as a proxy group that Pakistan has in the country, and mostly you will see Afghans telling you that Afghanistan is invaded through this proxy group by Pakistan. So any statement that's coming from Pakistan, regardless of the nature of the statement, most Afghans view it as a statement from the invader country. So I don't think it's welcomed, even if it's aid. You saw that the Pakistani ambassador in Kabul that was trying to distribute some aid or meet with youth leaders or other former ambassadors to according to him gain support for the people of Afghanistan. There was a huge backlash on social media against the ambassador. So that's the local, I think, reaction from the people to such statements. But to be honest with you, as a journalist, it's a double-edged sword. I think, on one hand, Afghans need help. It's perhaps one of the most horrible human catastrophes that the humanity has seen in the recent years. But on the other hand, any aid that goes to Afghanistan will eventually end up in the hands of the Taliban. And does the world want that aid to be given to the Taliban?
Farishta, you've given me, you've talked about people who are obviously, talking against Pakistan. I just wanted to know from you, where were them when Taliban were entering in Kabul, when Taliban were, being present in whole of Afghanistan, and of course, when they were everywhere. That is why Americans left Kabul, because they could sense that they have a huge number of people who are in their support at that time. I am not denying the fact that there might be few of the voices who are, against Pakistan, but you can't say that the majority of Afghanistan, is saying this against Pakistan. Of course, the world is looking at it from that side, in which, of course, Pakistan is helping out Afghanistan. Pakistan is the immediate country that has always extended help to Afghanistan whenever it needed. Of course, the humanitarian crisis, and in this earthquake as well, Pakistan has been constantly helping Afghanistan, and I think world can see that.
Right. Regardless of the moral aspect or argument, Farishta, let me also ask you something. Let me ask you about the total assessment of what it will take, the amount of money that it will take to bring Afghanistan out of this catastrophe that we are seeing it in. And I'm talking about humanitarian catastrophe.
Oh, well, you're asking me the question, like the total assessment?
I'm talking about overall assessment of total need Afghanistan has financial need to pull
Afghanistan
people
needs
out
at
of the
this
current
time-
crisis?
Yes, Afghanistan at this time, I think I can talk only as a journalist. I can talk on the basis of what people tell me on social media and through other media reports. So Asif Duranai Sab was in Afghanistan, and I think he will understand absolutely what I'm trying to say here. Afghanistan at this time needs a government. Afghanistan, more than food, we need a person to turn to. The Amir al-Mu'minin of the Taliban is turning his back to the people in a prayer. This is 21st century Afghanistan. This is insane, incredibly insane. There is no law in the country. So you can give food to the people. Imagine something like that happens in Pakistan. You don't have laws, you have no police, you have no army, you have no government. And people are coming in to giving you food. This is incredibly ridiculous in my opinion. Afghanistan needs a government right now. Afghanistan needs the whole community of the free world.
Farishta, can't we have both? I mean, on one side, I understand your political concerns. And you earlier said that whatever is going to come to Afghanistan is going to end up in the Taliban's hand. But is there not another way? Because there are NGOs on the ground who actually take care of the people, and they can do it, UN bodies particularly. At this moment, is it not a concern that the suffering humanity, its pain should be mitigated?
And also when we talk about the government that you're saying, I understand where you're coming from, but at the end of the day, that's not happening, and perhaps we're not really seeing any efforts made in that regard or any sort of development in that regard. While that doesn't happen, do we not give food to people?
No. We should give food to people, but food is not the fix. People are dying.
Sure.
13,000 children died in 3 winter months because of malnutrition, because there is no hospital. 2.5 million children will die. 1 out of 10 Afghan kids that's born new dies because there is no healthcare. There is no nutrition. So it's a huge human catastrophe. And this cannot be fixed with giving food here and giving food here. Of course, food is important. And I welcome everybody that gives food and shelter to those people. But that's not going to work.
Ms. Farishta, what do you propose should be done from within Afghanistan as well? I mean, there's of course the extent that the help that other countries can offer, that Pakistan can offer. But if you're saying that the people of Afghanistan have a different perspective and they really need a government, what are they doing about it, or what they need to do about it?
You are a woman, you understand me very well. Imagine you don't have police on the street of Islamabad. How would you go to your work? How would you live as a human being? Like, can you imagine? That's the state of my country. And
Farishta, are you living in Afghanistan right now?
I just left Afghanistan because of this crisis, because of this human catastrophe.
So this is also a problem, because the people who have left, actually they are saying there shouldn't be any aid, because until Taliban are kicked out of power, but the people who are there, Farishta, sorry, I don't want to be impolite, just hear me out. The problem is that the people who are sitting there are suffering. And no matter whether you're just looking at the fact that you're talking to PTV or the fact that you're the hosts are talking to you from Islamabad, not everyone thinks that whatever Taliban is doing is great. The only thing is you might be preaching to the choir, but at this moment you are actually obscuring a fact that people need help at this moment in Afghanistan.
Is doing great? Who said the Taliban is doing great to you as a journalist? Can you give me like one Afghan human being that told you that the Taliban
this is
doing
politics.
great?
I'm sorry, we were not.
Farishta,
can we go to ambassador
I
also?
can only tell you what people say. I cannot make things from
Farishta,
myself.
problem is to you, there is a set of group of people that is constantly appearing on Twitter. That group is being considered as Afghanistan because they are representative of Afghanistan. We are talking about people of Afghanistan.
Let me also get Mr. Asif
We're talking about people of Afghanistan.
Let's get in Mr. Asif in the discussion, and Farishta also quoted him as being in Afghanistan, and of course he can perhaps give a perspective which Ms. Farishta would also perhaps be able to understand. And Mr. Asif, the kind of on-ground situation that we're talking about here, does that actually exist, or does that actually exist on the scale that we're talking about? And if it does, so there's of course so much that needs to be done from within Afghanistan as well, and from the Taliban regime, that Pakistan extending its support, being a facilitator in talks, extending humanitarian aid, surely should be welcome.
Listen, when you talk about real politics, so till 14th of August, it was Mr. Ashraf Ghani who was ruling, supposedly. On 15th of August, now Taliban are ruling, and Americans left under an agreement. So whether we like it or not, one. Secondly, you asked about how much help is needed. As per the UN estimates, $4.5 billion are needed for this whole year. They could only get $1.2 billion. And, you are already half a year is, finished. So, and they did not get the adequate bare minimum aid which Afghanistan needed. Now, another common point which perhaps Farishta will also agree is that it's the people of Afghanistan. There are close to 32 million Afghans living inside Afghanistan. Maybe there are 5 to 6 million Afghans who are living outside their country. So think about 32 million people who are living in Afghanistan. The situation is very dire. You have rightly pointed out the statistics. In my reckoning, it's 3 million people, Afghan children who are vulnerable to malnutrition. Same is the case with the women, with the mothers, or expected mothers. It is a dire situation. And then you have to see, yes, women's plight is there. They are denied education. That is, no one likes it. And no one supports Taliban on that. That is a definite yes. But what to do that even now, Americans are in touch with Taliban in Doha, and the Qatar mission in Kabul is actually looking after the American interests. The whole world is now moving towards Afghanistan, so much so that Indians are now, they have opened their embassy. There are ground realities. Real politics you have to talk about. Yes, sentimental or emotional part is, everyone is with that. Everyone. My heart bleeds when a father sells his son's kidneys to pay back his loan. My heart bleeds when the girls of the ages of 5 to 6 years old are being sold for $2,000 in order that the rest of the family, they can be fed. So this is, I'm not saying it, it is available on the international media,
Exactly,
and which
sir.
is being done. So these
Right,
are the
and-
ground realities, and we have to look at that. So in
Right,
that
absolutely.
light, when
Absolutely,
Minister,
Ambassador Saab, and you have rightly pointed out repeatedly in this program and from the rulers in this country as well, we have been hearing the need for inclusive government in Afghanistan. There has been emphasis that women and other minority groups should be included in power, and that's why no country has recognized Afghan Taliban, including Pakistan. So this becomes a problem when people see everything in black and white and they don't see any gray. I'm also a father and I have daughters, and I have known so many Afghan girls, and my heart has been bleeding since the day Afghan Taliban took over and they forbade girls to actually go to school. And let us hope that instead of point scoring, I hope we can go back to Farishta. Instead of point scoring, we can actually find a common ground how to actually ensure that Afghan people get relief. If I'm outside Pakistan, I can say that don't support Pakistan. But when I'm here, I know what exactly is going on. I should be voicing the need for the people. So what is happening in Afghanistan is very serious, and let us hope in coming days we see solution.
Absolutely. And Farishta, earlier, of course, you were talking about me being able to sympathize or understand as women as well. And irrespective of that, of course, there are issues that women are facing, but there are others as well that people of Afghanistan are facing. And I remember this haunting story that I read about a one kidney village, or what is going on within Afghanistan, how it's become a norm for people to sell their kidneys in order to survive. And of course, there's so many other issues that are going on. And let me just come to you regarding the question that I want to put forward. Of course, when we talk about the issue of Afghanistan, there are a few things that come to mind that, however difficult may be, seem to be a way forward for there to be international recognition, for there to be the Taliban regime fulfilling their demands, getting inclusivity, easing the situation for access of education to women and other rights, and of course bringing in other changes that they ask for, and also including their soil not to be used against any other territory. All of that is required. That of course, there's a humanitarian crisis, so aid is required. These are some solutions or measures that immediately come to mind when you talk about the issue of Afghanistan. But what seems to be the problem here, I don't understand, that you're trying to point out. What is the issue at the moment? What is it that you think needs to be really done in order to actually help the people of Afghanistan? Because maybe we're not really understanding what you're saying, but could you help explain what are you proposing to be the step forward?
Audio.
Could you please unmute yourself, Farishta? I don't think we can hear you.
I am not mute.
Okay,
On mute.
Yeah.
great. Now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Again, audio.
It's gone again. Can you try again?
Do you hear me now?
Yes, it's working now. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mute and unmute myself. My apologies for that. The problem is that Maqbool Saiba, at this time, my aunt is living in Kabul and she's fighting cancer. She is ready to pay $2,000 for a visa to Pakistan to get her chemotherapy. She is through the process, but she cannot. This is the situation of ordinary Afghan families. This is a mother of 5 children. This is the catastrophe that I'm talking about. Now, how much food will fix that? I don't know. That is our problem as a people. And I'm telling you people's situation. What can be fixed as human beings? And I'm talking to you as human beings, not a Pakistani, not an Afghan, just on human ground. The problem with what can be the problem with Afghanistan, and speaking of realities, Asif Jaladi pointed at a very good thing. We had Ashraf Ghani as a president, we had a constitution, we had a nation that was fighting terrorism, but then suddenly everything changed, and now a militant group and a man that is not showing his face to us is leading our country. So realities change, and this reality must change for the people of Afghanistan.
How?
There is no way around it. But how it changes?
How exactly do you propose this change happens?
The world must understand that a terrorist group cannot rule a country of 40 million people, and the people are fighting them. Today in Kabul, the mullahs were having a jalsa, a big jalsa.
But what exactly do you want the world to do about this?
The world must stop.
They're not recognizing the regime.
Farishta, would you condemn Indians coming to Kabul and sitting with the very people you are claiming them to be the terrorists and talking to them? Do you condemn them?
Anyone
Yeah,
that speaks
regardless,
to the Taliban,
going back to the question that Sana raised, what should the world do? Should they withhold the monies that they owe to the Afghanistani people?
Yes, the world must withdraw. The first thing you do is withdraw. Stop meeting the Taliban. This is a militant group. It's danger for the rest of the world. It's bad.
All right. Thank you very much. First, I respect your opinion. Thank you very much, Mr. Asif Jaladi, for joining us. Of course, there are costs of any choices and any decisions we make, and some costs are way too huge, and so we really should think about making such decisions. Farrukh, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to very humbly say that there are two. I understand that Farishta must have a relative who is living in Afghanistan, but usually what happens when you are out of a country, you are free of the pressures that you have to face on the ground. My humble submission at this moment is, please think about your kith and kin who are literally suffering.
Absolutely.
We know about an anchor who lost a job and is begging for food.
Yeah.
Right? It is my profession. So honestly, at this moment, it is very important to realize that people are suffering, and my way or highway won't work. You'll have to find a middle ground.
Absolutely.
Thank
That's
you.
all we have time for from the debate. Thanks a lot for watching in. We'll see you tomorrow.